Saluton kaj bonvenon al Esperanto 101 Leciono 6. Hello and welcome to Esperanto 101 Lesson 6. Today we're going to be talking about a few more easily misunderstood words, easily for an English speaker, misunderstood Esperanto words, things the dictionary might not make the most sense of for you. And then I'm going to talk to you about some resources you can use, places you can find Esperantists to talk to practice, or places you can find Esperanto books to read to practice. Because really, from here on out, you've got the basic structure of the language, you have some basic vocabulary, and all that's going to really make that push from here on out is just practice. You're going to spend a lot of time talking to people or reading books, and as I've mentioned before, it's going to feel like you're looking up every other word for what feels like an embarrassingly long time, but we have all been there. Every last one of us. Some of us are still there. Even if we have full conversations, it's not a shameful thing to look up words in the dictionary a lot. That's how we learn. But first, I'm going to help you out with some of these words that the dictionary might not be best at explaining. First is ve. Ve is just a general exclamation of unhappiness. For example, hove is something like, oh no. And if I just said ve, that could be, I'll say drat. It's not actually a swear word at all. It's just a general statement of unhappiness. You might also say ve when you drop something, like oops. So it can mean any of those sort of things. Next is play. P-L-E-J, to use the English names of the letters. Play means most. And Esperanto does not have the same kind of est suffix that English has, like funniest. Instead of funniest, you say most funny. Instead of funnier, you say more funny. So amusa, pli amusa, play amusa. Funny, funnier, funniest. Bona, pli bona, play bona. Good, better, best. Another confusing one is you des. You and des are two separate words. Together they form the same kind of sentence structure that you find in English phrases like the more the merrier, the faster the better. For example, the more the merrier might be translated as ju pli multaj, des pli feliĉaj. So the you is the first the in that structure, and des is the second. They are two separate words in Esperanto. We just use the word the in English. But that is the sentence structure you will find it in, and that is the only time you will find those words. Mem means self. So you want to be careful though, because you don't want to say like li mem and she mem when what you mean is si, si. Remember we talked about that during week 1. It's the reflexive pronoun for third person, he, she, it, they. So you don't want to use that necessarily for himself or herself, but if I'm saying, I looked at myself in the mirror, I would say, mi rigardis min, or I could say, mi rigardis min mem en la spegulo. Mem can also be used in conjunction with other words, like self-made, mem faritain, or things of that nature. But as I said, you don't want to overuse it when what you mean is the separate pronoun si, which is reflexive for himself, herself, itself, themselves. And you don't want to overuse it necessarily when you could just say, mi rigardis min, I saw me, is actually perfectly okay grammar in Esperanto. You don't have to say, I saw me, myself. It just seems a little bit excessive. There's a set of 3 words I want to differentiate between, because they can all be translated as just or only. Specifically just. Jus, jo, that's a J with a hat. U, that's a U. So, that's an S. So, J with a hat, U-S. Jus means just, as in the time sense. So, I just finished this, like just now. Nur means just, as in only. So, if you're saying, I just looked, like, not as in, I just now looked, but as in, I only looked and that's all I did, you would say, mi nur vidis, or mi nur rigardis. If you wanted to say, I just now looked, that would be mi jus vidis, or mi jus rigardis. And then you have sole. Sola is the adjective alone. So sole is the adverb form of alone. So if I am saying that mi sole faris ion, then I alone, I by myself did it. I did it by myself. And that is different than saying that mi nur faris ion, which is to say, I only did, or I only made something. Which is also still different again than mi faris nur tion, which is to say, I only made that. Not I only made that, but I only made that. And it's like we've talked about with a few other words, where with things like nur, you want to make sure that it's put right before the word that you're going to be using it to impact. Sort of like with ankau, or also. There's a difference in meaning between saying nur mi faris gin, only I did it, or mi nur faris gin, I only did it, or mi faris nur gin, I only did it. that is something to keep in mind, and is the difference between those potentially confusing words. Now, since I haven't actually gone over it in very much detail, I'm going to take this time to go over a very brief history of Esperanto and talk in a little bit more depth about what it is, how it came to be. Esperanto was created by a Jewish eye doctor from Poland named L.L. Zamenhof. He is celebrated on December 15th in Esperanto circles as Zamenhof-tago, Zamenhof Day. And he was the creator of Esperanto about 126 years ago, give or take a few months. The reasoning behind it was created to be an international language of peace, because Zamenhof lived in a time and place where there were several languages struggling for power, each one wanting to be the most powerful language and using politics to accomplish that, and using these languages to accomplish political things, so that if we're speaking my home language and not your home language, then you can be left out while I'm talking to this guy who speaks the same native language as me. If it's your second language, I'm sure every one of you has noticed that if I'm speaking my first language and you're speaking your second language, then we've got an automatic power imbalance. If it's my first language, then I have a little bit more power in the situation than you do, because I know the language better. I'm not having to think about what the next word is. How do I say that in this language? And you might be. Even if you've known the language for years, you're not going to automatically know some obscure words that you would definitely know in your native language, just from having used it for so much longer. And that was a problem that Zamenhof saw. French was, at the time, one of the most prominent national languages. You may recognize it from the term lingua franca to refer to an international language, because right then, French was the international language. And if you're speaking French to a Frenchman and you're an Englishman, that Frenchman knows that you're an Englishman. Like, you can't hide it very well. You're going to have an accent. And a Frenchman might treat another Frenchman in a different way than he would treat an Englishman, simply because of ease of communication. And Esperanto was created to make that less of a problem, so that if my native language is English and yours is French, then why don't we speak Esperanto, which is a second language to both of us, so that way we're on neutral ground again, and we can start off on level ground and work from there, work our way up in friendship together. So that is the goal of Esperanto. That is the fina venko, the final victory, is to become an international second language, so that by being able to communicate with one another, it might make peace just a little bit easier to find, because it's a little bit easier to make peace with someone when you have some idea what they're saying. So, that is the origin of Esperanto. And since that time, it has risen to, estimates vary between 100,000 and a couple million speakers, which sounds like a lot, because 2 million is a lot. But on the other hand, that's less than the population of the city of Dallas. And it's really doing well for itself as a constructed language. Esperanto has been gaining speakers, while other native languages around the world have been losing speakers. And based on that, it's done pretty well for itself. It is a legitimate living language now, which I wouldn't have predicted 126 years ago if I were alive then. Certainly not. Who would have guessed that it could have done so well? But it's still a long way from the Finavenko. Now, as I promised, places that you can go to for extra help and to find more of an Esperanto community. First of all, see if your local area has an Esperanto group. If you live in the United States, go to Esperanto USA, esperanto-usa.org, or just Google Esperanto USA. If you live outside of the United States, Google Esperanto and then your native country, wherever it is you're living now. And see if you've got a local group of people there that you can talk to and that can help you out and help you practice the language out loud, face to face, because that really helps, even if it's really scary. Another thing you could do is, if you're not familiar with Project Gutenberg, become familiar with Project Gutenberg. It has tons of free ebooks, public domain books, and it also, incidentally, has tons of free Esperanto books that are written in Esperanto or about Esperanto, if you'd rather that. And you can find Esperanto translations on Gutenberg of lots of great classic literature that happens to be old enough to be public domain. If you have a Facebook account, check out the Esperanto group on Facebook. I have placed 2 links so far on the sidebar of our class subreddit, leading you to an Esperanto group on Facebook where there are thousands of Esperantists that you can talk to, and every week I see someone on there just saying Saluton el whichever place they're from, and just getting to know people that way, seeing greetings from around the world. And it's so cool to be able to talk to people from around the world, many of whom don't share any other language with you other than Esperanto. And I think that's just amazing. I've also placed on there a link to an Esperanto Skype group listed on Facebook. It's Skypanoi, which is users of Skype, and that has on it a document within that group that will give you the Skype information for many Esperantists, so you can add them on there, and if they have placed it on there, that means they meant for it to be public. And Esperantists love talking to Esperantists. So many of them will very happily add you just for a chance to be able to practice the language a little more themselves. And that way you can talk to them via text messages where it's nice and safe and you have plenty of time to look in the dictionary. And then when you think you're comfortable with it, once you've gotten the hang of saying sentences without having to look up words very often, then you can move on to trying to talk out loud. once you're down to like a third of the words in a sentence, if you're like me. And it will be scary, but it'll also be really, really cool the first time you succeed. I found it helpful for me to set a lot of little bitty tiny goals. Like, one person I know says that they consider themselves to have really learned a language as soon as they can say something in that language that they couldn't say in their native language. Which is why I've had some of the just for fun activities that I've had. Because it's neat to be able to really feel like you've got a grasp on the language when you can say something in this second language that you've just learned, which you can't even figure out quite how to say it in your native language. You know what it means, it just doesn't translate into your first language, and that's fun, because that means you can already say things in Esperanto that you couldn't in English. Another little goal I found that I made for myself is when I can be sarcastic in Esperanto, when I'm comfortable enough to be sarcastic or make jokes, to use words for other than their literal meaning, then that's a good step. That means I understand the language. I'm not just confined by the hard and fast rules of what things literally mean. So, try making up little goals like that for yourself, because if your main goal for the language is to be able to speak perfectly out loud, or be able to have out loud conversations without the other person understanding that you're very new at this language, that's gonna take a while. If your main goal is to be able to read a classic literature book without ever cracking a dictionary, that's gonna take a while. But it's not important to do these things without ever having to look up a dictionary. Look up words in a dictionary. It's just important to be able to do them. And when you're talking to people in Esperanto, we don't care if you take 5 minutes to write one sentence. Heck, we probably don't even notice. Odds are, if you're writing to us, it's probably on the internet, and we're used to people taking that long. Or if it's not on the internet, then it's on paper, and we're even more used to people taking a really long time. If you're talking to people out loud in Esperanto, if you're talking to people in any way in Esperanto, we're just so happy to be able to share this fun, flexible language with other people, where we can, even if we're relatively new, say things in this new language that we couldn't say in our old languages. And it's just so much fun, and so much fun to meet people from all these different cultures, that no one is going to look down on you for not being perfect. They might correct you, but they're not correcting you from a stance of looking down on you. They're correcting you from a stance of, oh man, I know how many times I made that mistake, and trying to help you so that you don't embarrass yourself as much as we might have embarrassed ourselves in the past. Or just making an observation and teaching, because this is fun. And even if it's not our native language, it's our language now, and we love to share it with people. So, dankon por partopreni mian kurson. Thank you for taking part in my class. Kai bonvenon al Esperantujo. Welcome to Esperanto land. I know you'll enjoy yourselves here.